BBC Scotland channel recently aired a new documentary called The Rise and Fall of Timex Dundee. This documentary chronicled really the industrial action or strike and quite a bit of the history of the Timex factory that was here in Dundee for a total of 47 years. The industrial strike that it covers happened way back in 1993 and potentially caused or even perhaps accelerated the end of that factory and Timex's time in Dundee. Now, that company, of course, is famous for making watches. We see it right from the start. And in this video, I should say, I'm going to talk about, this is going to be a very long video. I'm going to go through this documentary, at least a couple of stages in the documentary, talk about it, and actually also give my own personal and family experiences of the situation, of a similar situation really, and talk about my feelings in regards to what happens in this. So, Timex, as I said, famous for watches, as we see right from the start. Timex takes a licking and keeps on ticking, as we see at the start, where they attach one of Timex's watches to an outboard motor. They put it in water, rev the motor, and the watch actually survives and is still working. Timex here in Dundee made a lot of these watches for many years of its 47-year history or duration in Dundee. That's where many thousand watches. I think the estimate, at the top end was something like about 200,000 watches made in 1 year. I think it was the most they did. Apart from a period of a few years where they actually switched from making watches to making electrical circuit boards for Sinclair computers and products. Sinclair, obviously the company that promised to kind of revolutionise electronics in the mid to late 80s and early 90s, which never really happened. I don't know what the status of the company is these days, whether it still exists, but they wanted to be one of the household revolutionisers of that type of product, but never really happened. The staff at Timex were mostly female. They had originally two locations, one near the kind of city centre, near the kind of the way I remember it on the map of the programme. It was kind of near the city centre, near kind of the Tay Bridge in that area, where they had male workers kind of creating the parts for the watches, and then the place where this documentary talks about, the main location of Timex in Dundee, near Camperdown, where the mostly female employees in that factory put the watches together, made sure they were working. And like I said, they were a very skilled job, and we get to hear a lot about what the atmosphere was like, what it was like working there, and this I like the kind of way that these kind of documentaries are put together, because we see not only interviews from employees who worked there and people involved in the strike, including one police officer who, Bob his name is, I can't remember what his second name is, Bob, but to be honest, I take a disliking to him. He just seemed a bit uppity and so forth. Make your own minds up if you watch The Rise and Fall of Timex Dundee. And we also see a lot of archive footage from BBC News and interviews that they do at the time as well. So it's good we do see not just talking heads and interviews, but we also see footage from 1993 of what happened. So Timex, they have the factory, they're making the watches, and this is here comes the first misstep, I think, from Timex, and this is a really scratch your head moment. There is a gentleman called Peter Hall who actually, according to the documentary, refused when asked to be interviewed for the programme. He is, I think his title was the Managing Director of Timex UK. He comes off as an abrasive personality in the programme. He was an abrasive person. He's not in Dundee much. He lives in about the south of England, I think they say. Although he's barking orders through the telephone, etc. He seems to show up where he wants. He does seem, apparently, according to a couple of employees, but quite a personable person, a kind person, a nice person when he's on the shop floor. But you do get the impression as the documentary goes on, the way people talk about him, that he's not the greatest person. I'd never met him, but we don't get a great impression of Peter Hall throughout this documentary. Whether that's completely accurate or not, obviously I can't really say. But the first misstep of Timex is after the Sinclair contract ends, they're facing shortage of work. And instead of, it seems, being open and honest with the employees and discussing what happens too much, they decide to make layoffs. Now, there is an option suggested, and I don't know how far officially it got, but there is a suggestion by at least a few employees about why don't they change to a 2-week working pattern. Some of the workforce, or half of the workforce, would work 1 week, and then the next week they would sign on, claim unemployment, be on the dole, however you want to term it, and the other half of the workforce would be working. So 1 week you would be working, the next week you would be signing on, claiming unemployment, and then you would be back to working, and then the next week, and repeating that pattern, which is rejected by Timex, and this is where they make the misstep of laying off people. Now, there's no good, really, way of making these announcements and laying off people. I understand that, but the way they do it is a bit ridiculous and, frankly, to be honest, a bit disgusting in my opinion, because they announce layoffs on Christmas Eve, which, Christmas is a period where a lot, obviously they talk about families have a lot of expenditure, families have a lot of outgoings, but they wait till Christmas Eve to announce it. Now, it's not exactly known whether it is exactly on Christmas Eve that they do this, but the way they also do the layoffs is pretty annoying in my view of thinking, because they wait till about 10 minutes before the end of the shift, and they come out with 2 different coloured envelopes, one white envelope and one brown envelope. And the way they do it, announcing it on Christmas Eve, and the way that they seem to have chosen the people to be laid off, seems very dodgy in my opinion. Because according to a couple of employees, they deliberately pick union representatives, also known as shop stewards, to be laid off. Because especially one of the ladies states that she absolutely knew that when they start giving out the white envelopes, which is your pay, or the brown envelopes, meaning you're getting paid off and bye-bye, they're giving them to all the shop stewards, so she could instantly pick out him, and him, that person, all the union representatives, all the shop stewards. She could pick that they are all getting laid off. So fast forward to the end of January, after some of the layoffs, like I said, they selected, seems, union representatives, shop stewards, to be laid off, which, to be honest, like I said, it seems they're deliberately trying to, they're certainly trying to, it seems, affect the organisation, union-wise, and certainly I think the morale of the employees, which to me sounds like to me they have a plan going forward of maybe trying to get rid of the union people, and then they can pretty much roll over people. And move forward to the end of January, about January 29th. They have a meeting and they end up deciding to go on strike. They get with the union again. It's a little bit glossed over exactly how it happens, but they all decide that they're going on strike, and I think 29th of January is the first day of the strike, because they are also facing more cuts to working hours, wages and benefits. Now, I want to remind people at this point that this is 1993. This is years before any type of national wage and living wage, national minimum wage, any legislation in regards to that. So obviously strikes like that, they are getting their wages cut at this point, and who's to say that it won't happen again in 6 months, a year, 2 years, that they'll get their wages and hours continually cut. more and more. Like I said, there's no legislation to protect the workers at this time, even in 1993, which seems horrendous looking back on it. But there was no legislation in place, so employers could really basically pay how much or as little as they want. And so in order to try and protect themselves, provide a decent income to their families, that's why strikes happen. Now, I will say I'm not much of a union person. I don't have much trust in unions, but certainly in those days, that is kind of why still kind of organising of that type still happened. I know there's still unions these days, but again, there's no legislation to protect people, and even though, especially even here in Dundee, this is again where I can start bringing in my own personal experience into this. Even in Dundee, even if families had parents or family members working, in those days there were even still many families in Dundee, which still is to this day, many families, even if they worked full time, were still very much on the breadline. And to be honest, it's a case of trying to obviously pay your bills and have yourselves a situation where you can have a roof over your house, over your head, of course, and buy food and make sure you could live or even just survive. And so that is kind of part of it, and I think what happened basically, it's kind of glossed over, but what happened basically is they all decide to go out, and so they go out and they're kind of start the kind of traditional strike that you see of standing at the gates and with their placards and uniforms hung on wires from tree to tree, with their banners and so forth like that, and standing outside the gates. Fast forward also a little bit more into 2 weeks into the strike, and that is, you're talking about the 17th day, I think it is, of the strike. 17th and 18th of days of the strike is where the next couple of bits happen. On the 17th, they hold a meeting. I think this may be the first meeting, or certainly one of the meetings they hold at the Marriott Hall, which is attached to the Caird Hall here in Dundee, right at the city centre and the city square. They hold a meeting there, and although one of the conveners, the shop stewards, rips up his letter that they've received, and basically saying that they receive a letter saying come back to work or you'll be sacked. Even though one of them, the conveners, the shop stewards, ripped up his letter while he does his speech, they all basically decide, in order to protect their jobs and protect the work and protect the factory, and to kind of move forward in this matter, to the next day return to work, to continue working. So they're working, they're starting to earn money again, because obviously if they're on strike they're not being paid, and they'll return to work, and then they'll continue negotiations and try and sort this matter out. The next day, on day 18, I'm sure it is the next day, they turn up in their work gear and their overalls, and they get blocked by the police from going in the factory and resuming work. Now, one of the conveners, I can't remember the name of the other two, there's the other two escaping right now, but one of them is called Charlie Malone, who's no relation to me. I would otherwise be aware of that. It's just the same surname. He is kind of leading from out the front gate, and basically he says, I want to return to work. You're preventing me from returning to work. Now, it's not unusual to have a police presence at these kinds of strikes, these kind of protests. Initially, for the first few weeks, it's obviously a local police presence. These situations, I don't know what it's like nowadays, but some police forces these days have to pay other forces in other areas. They actually have to pay them to kind of reinforce them, or if they don't want their local officers at a particular protest or strike like this, they have to pay that area to provide policing for at that specific location. I don't know how it worked then, but it's traditional and it's not an unusual tactic for it to be local police for the first few weeks, And then if the police want a firmer hand on things and they don't want local retaliation against their officers, they'll get policing from other areas, especially in the cases of where the police want to be more firm with these strikers or these protesters. If they want, the local police officers may have friends or family or at least people they know as a part of the protest or strike, and so they will say, well, I'm not physically manhandling Mrs. Smith, Mr. Jones, John Doe, Jane Doe. I'm not, you're telling me to do it, but I'm not going to go in there and literally push them and gather them, bottleneck them, and kind of encompass them and really put a firm hand in policing them. I'm not going to do that. And obviously police from other areas, especially years and years gone by, not so much I think in 1983 and on, I think, but certainly decades and decades ago, some of those police officers used to be kind of handpicked from other areas. So it's like, right, you're a tough guy, you're a tough guy, you're a tough, right, 15 of you guys, right, I'm going to handpick 15 of you guys, and you'll go to this other area and you'll protest this strike or this protest, you'll police it, because I know you, if I tell you to physically push the people back, or to do such and such thing, or to bring out your police truncheon and use it, or to do whatever we want you to do, you'll do it. That's not unusual. And so police from other areas, they don't normally have a dog in the fight, as they say, and so they'll follow their commands of the police, especially, like I said, if the police want to be firmer, which leads to a few flashpoints throughout the protest, especially even early on in the strike. I think in that day 18, some of them do get pushed around. Even some of the older women complain about being kicked or being hit or being pushed about. Now, during this time, a lot of the strike is obviously very well publicised. We see, again, still archived footage from BBC and BBC News. This attracts quite a few people to come up and either talk to the protesters, talk to the strikers, give them advice or supposedly give them support. There's Arthur Scargill, the coal miner, the union guy that's supposed for the coal miners' strike. Another one is Tommy Sheridan and other members of the Socialist Party. Tommy Sheridan makes an appearance during the time between like the 29th of January and kind of the time of going to cover next, which is about the 14th of June. During that time, Tommy Sheridan turns up. Now, I will say something about Tommy Sheridan, and this is again all just on my own personal opinion. There is a debate on this programme whether Tommy Sheridan and the Socialist Party are invited or not. He says he was. At least one of the lady employees that they talked to in the interview says he wasn't. Whether he was or not, in my opinion, again, Tommy Sheridan is, especially in 1993, though he was just, according to him, and I believe it's right, just elected to the Glasgow City Council. Tommy Sheridan's always been a bit of a publicity hound to me. To me, in my opinion, again, he's a bit of a publicity hound. He'd turn up at the opening of an envelope if it was publicised, and if he could stick his nose in and get publicity for himself and whatever cause he's kind of chasing at the time. That's my opinion. I don't know whether he really was invited, but he deliberately gets himself involved. There is one point where he's arrested where a few of the eyewitnesses said he actually wasn't doing anything wrong, but and again, that's where that police officer Bob, who I think retired as sergeant or something, he's another one that's interviewed during it, and to be honest, his attitude rubs me up the wrong way as well. Not just Peter Hall, it seems a bit abrasive, but that Bob guy, I think it's Bob Ryder or something. Anyway, I may be getting his name wrong. I know it's Bob something. He seems very aloof, and like the police could do no. Obviously, maybe it's perhaps because he's a former police officer. He's one of the police officers who was actually involved in policing it, and I think he is seeing. I think he was one of the arresting officers of Tommy Sheridan at one of the points where he gets arrested, at least. he ended up getting promoted later on and is now retired, but he's very aloof and the police can do no wrong. The police are always right, and he's just a very upper class kind of attitude. It doesn't really, I get the impression he really did not care about about the strike, those on strike at all, and really didn't is above the working class. I got that impression from him as well. So Tommy Sheridan, again, he seeks publicity, in my opinion, and he sticks his nose in people's businesses, especially if it's a well publicised strike like this. There's lots of different people from outside Dundee that start to turn up, and eventually that does cause scuffles. And that's where police do get a lot firmer and start arresting people and dragging people off and kind of like bottlenecking people. I can't remember what the phrase that police use these days. It came in a few years ago, where they basically control people in a certain way. I can't remember. It's not bottlenecking, but it's kind of something similar. I can't remember what they call it, but basically controlling where people are allowed to go. But this is all basically just standing at the front gates. Now, after they're denied, I have to cover the kind of policing in that area, policing of that, because I think it felt it's really important. Like I said, there are other people out from outside Dundee that again maybe won't look for publicity for their own causes, that eventually, I think that's the start, as we see later on during the strike, so that causes some of the trouble, because especially if you see one part of it, there is somebody pushing people down. It's very noticeable. You see people pushing, there's a little bit of a hill, and they're kind of pushing people, or telling people to get down there and push against the police. That seems to be, I'm not completely blaming people from outside Dundee that it gets out of hand and there's scuffles and arrests at a few points, but it does seem some other people kind of joined the cause. They kind of supposedly joined the cause, and it does get into a bit more scuffles, a bit more arrests, and a bit more trouble and a bit more violence than it actually should have been. Going further. Now, after this is where also another misstep by Timex is when on the day that they refused, and I think it's day 18 of the protest, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I felt again the policing needed to be talked about, and what goes on during the policing outside the gates needed to be talked about and covered. On the day that they refused, the police refused, and Timex obviously made the decision to refuse the workers to return to work. Notices are hand delivered to the 300 employees' homes, basically saying you're sacked. And on that same day, an advertisement appears in the Evening Telegraph, advertising for basically temporary workers, or as they're known, scabs. Those are basically people who will go in, who will take over the strikers' jobs, work for, as discussed, even less money than the employees are being paid, and basically keep the factory going, or really take their job, basically take the strikers' jobs, while the strikers are trying to protest against everything that's happening, which lowers the leverage of the strikers, because the employees, specifically Timex, will say, well, do we really need you guys, because we're paying these people a lot less money than we're paying you, and at least some of the work is getting done, and so when we look for more people at this less amount that we're paying these scabs, it kind of loses a little bit. It's not as if the factories had stopped at a dead stop. There is at least some part of the percentage of work being done by these temporary workers or scabs, which again lessens leverage, and they're again well before minimum wage, so they're paying these temporary workers a lot less money, getting at least some of the work done to continue the factory, and that leads to a lot of flashpoints as well. That leads to some of the flashpoints outside the gates, because my father was actually because they call this the last major strike in the UK. Whether it indeed was, I'm not really really researched it, but, and I don't, this is not mentioned, this is one thing I'm going to highlight, because I know this is going to be a very long video, but I'm going to highlight this. Less than 2 years before, at least a year, 18 months or so before, there was another major strike or similar strike less than a mile away from the Timex factory. Many Dundonians may remember the name or know the name Ferranti or Albacom. Albacom is still in business. It actually still, I believe it's still the same company because I know they took over Ferranti. They still operate from a smaller building that is kind of relatively nearby. I think it's maybe still on the same street but up a little bit. I can't remember exactly where. But they still operate fairly nearby where the originally called Ferranti factory was, which made parts for things like aeroplanes on Dunsane Avenue. Less than a mile away. It's about an 0.8 of a mile away, according to what I searched on Google Earth, which sounds about right. There was a strike there about a year or so before that, which my father was part of. That was also due to cuts in hours, pay, benefits, including holidays, and health and safety as well, because there was a couple of minor incidents of several, actually, I believe, incidents, thankfully, of minor injuries happening, and that didn't end well as well. Or also, but I don't know. That is not even discussed, which I kind of find a bit weird. But I think again, maybe they've just got an hour to tell the story of Timex, and there's so much to cover. There is a few pieces that are glanced over. I don't know. I don't know whether anybody had family or relations that were part of the Ferranti Albacom strike, and whether that affected the mindset of the workers, knowing what the outcome was there. Approximately a year earlier, I think it was, just after a year, 13 months ago, when the Timex strike started, was when those Albacom workers were blanket sacked. They were told, you're not going to be returning to your jobs now, ever. Certainly not here. So I don't know whether that came into the mindset of the people that worked in Timex. Obviously they would have been aware of that. Less than a mile away, another local strike. Many people will have, again, family relations that worked in Ferranti Albacom. I don't know whether that worked into the mindset of the Timex workers, but I'm sure it must have, because there's no way that they could not have any knowledge. There's no way they could deny any knowledge of that situation either. So temporary workers brought in. Again, this leads to some of the flashpoints, particularly as they discuss on Monday mornings. Now, I was at Ferranti Albacom factory, and I call it Ferranti Albacom just so people know what I'm talking about, the Dundonians or people who are maybe aware of that factory. I was only there just because of the timing wise of it. A few times where these scabs or temporary workers were bust into the Ferranti Albacom factory, and you see it's very similar as what I could remember. You get them bust in, obviously hiding their faces because they don't want people to know who they are and who is taking their jobs again. Maybe if they live locally, there could be recriminations. But you see the big flashpoints and protests and push forward, and obviously the strikers try and block the gates, police push them back and so forth. Again, they're basically taking their jobs at this point. And so you see it several flashpoints, and you can imagine that happens quite regular. That was happening quite on a regular basis during the whole 6 odd months of the strike, where the temporary workers were bust in or bust out. Where you would get that, you would get strikers trying to block them getting in, or trying to hit the buses, punch the buses. I saw it a couple of times where the buses for Albacom were punched and kicked at, and I remember especially one, a big blue bus, a really old style bus, almost like a double decker like you would see on the buses, but it was big painted blue. People were kicking and punching. We were well back from it. It wasn't as violent certainly when I was there. Wasn't and I was only really there a few times where that happened, where temporary workers came in or out. I was only there really a few times, so I don't know what it was like normally, but certainly you can imagine kind of really quite a bit of hysteria and quite a bit of anger and frustration, a bit heated at those times. So I can understand that. Move forward, flashing disease. This kind of of the kind of strike continues until about the 14th of June. Now, there's a couple of bits that happen in June. Peter Hall, the gentleman I talked about, who seems very abrasive, resigns, citing personal reasons. Now, this is a bit that's I think a bit unfortunate, because you hear about how abrasive it is, how he's basically the one that's leading the negotiations on Timex's end and turning them down time after time. The negotiations are not going anywhere, and obviously, again, I don't know who said what and what happened at the meetings and negotiations, but he resigns citing personal reasons from Timex, and there's lots of kind of celebrations by the strikers. I think they think because he's out the way that things are going to move and be resolved quite quickly, and they're going to return to their jobs. That obviously doesn't happen. There is that kind of false hope, unfortunately. They're also in June. I think it may be around about the same day, same time. So the 14th of June, there is a meeting between three shop stewards. The three representatives of the workers meet with Timex representatives in a hotel in Dundee. I think it's now knocked down. And I think I'll have to look at the footage again, but I'm pretty sure where that hotel stood is now basically the Overgate Shopping Centre. I'm pretty sure that is right. Anyway, they go in for a meeting with Timex representatives, and we don't hear about what exactly happened in that meeting, what positions were, how they were negotiated, but we do see quickly, 40 minutes later, there is a gentleman who's representative of Timex that basically announces the end of the strike, because Timex kind of say that they'll be losing about tens of millions of pounds, and that they're closing the Timex factory after nearly 50 years in the city. Now that basically takes the wind out the sails of the Timex workers. That basically ends the strike. Although they do continue until October, that obviously basically ends it, because Timex are saying, we've taken the decision to close the factory and move the manufacturing that happened at Timex Dundee abroad. I think it's like Thailand and the Philippines that they eventually move the manufacturing to, and they basically announced that there is really no jobs to return to, and that they estimate there'll be about a 6-month timeline of shutting down the plant, which actually is it goes a lot quicker. They eventually shut down, I think, the 28th or 29th of August, I think, is when the factory actually shuts its gates. The strikers never returning to work. They continue their protest until about the 14th of October. We have another meeting in the Marriott Hall where basically the union withdraws any legal protection, which basically means, I think, that any costs that the Timex company has kind of accumulated, any extra costs that they kind of out of pocket costs that they've received, they could actually then kind of legally go after the workers to recover. And so the union withdrawing their legal protection, basically I believe that's what it means. And so the workers not wanting to be kind of, obviously, especially none of them getting paid during this time, which is another thing we don't really get into, is how exactly the families have been supporting themselves. Some of it's been through donations you get and charities and stuff. We're certainly involved in the Franny Albacom families. During that time, and I don't know whether it worked. I would assume it worked on a slightly similar basis for the Timex workers. Some of them may have obviously had partners and other family members that worked, so maybe they were living on their wage. But and you don't hear kind of what level wages were going to be cut. I think I said it earlier, but we don't really hear about how the wages of Timex workers, who were they say were on a decent wage, how much they were going to get cut, and how comparable it was going to be to other areas or other employers in the city. But of course, again, like I said earlier, they wanted to stop Timex going, okay, well, cut your wages and hours last year. Well, guess what? We're going to do the same again. So that's kind of, they have to make a stand, as I said at the start of this video. So basically, they have a meeting in the Marriott Hall, which the union, withdraws its protection legally, and that ends the strike. So that basically ends any, because I said the factory is already shut, so there's no really any hope at all of returning to any such jobs, which kind of basically ends, as I said, the Timex tenure in Dundee after 47 years. The one thing I will say about this documentary, like I said, there's missteps from both sides. Timex, the way they handle it, announcing the dismissals on Christmas Eve, targeting the shop stewards. And if this strike didn't happen, you have to wonder what Timex's plans were. Were they already thinking about moving manufacturing abroad and shutting down the plant? Did the strike hasten their plans? Were they maybe thinking of phasing out the factory within 2 or 3 years? It's difficult and pretty much impossible to say. We don't know. Obviously, Peter Hall, I don't think he would have given the truth, to be honest. From what, again, the impression I got from him from this, I don't think he would have completely given the truth about this. I don't think he would claim to know what the plans were, even if he was given the plans, because if they were moving abroad, I think they would probably possibly even made him redundant as well. He would have probably got a nice payoff. Or perhaps he would have been, again, like he was, living in the south of England and travelling occasionally to Dundee. Maybe he would have occasionally travelled abroad to check on things, supposedly. Were there mistakes on both sides? Yes. Some of the female employees said that the male shop stewards, they were basically, we want this, these are our demands and we're sticking to them. Well, a couple, I don't know whether it would have been true that some of the females said that they would have kind of been more willing to negotiate. They would have kept to as a hard and as fast position as the male shop stewards. If they were more flexible in their negotiations, would have the workers been able to return to work, and maybe Timex changed their mind and kept the factory open? I don't know. It's impossible to say, really, without knowing exactly what Timex's plans were and knowing exactly what potentially could have happened. I mean, could the factory have still survived till this day in 2019, going into 2020? Economically, business-wise, it's very difficult to say. Also, because we've seen such a change to, especially even though these last 25, 26 years, we've seen many companies take their manufacturing from Dundee and the UK and across Scotland, UK, to abroad. That might have happened anyway, just a little bit further down the road. It's impossible to really know what would have happened that, but it's very difficult. So certainly mistakes were made on both parts. Dundee's been hit with manufacturing really basically leaving. And let's say with the jute mills that we used to have here in Dundee that used to employ thousands upon thousands of people, like 50 odd thousand people at least at its peak. I think it was even probably more than that. I think maybe 500,000 or something. Certainly many thousands of people were employed in some capacity either in or related to the jute trade here in Dundee at one point. Whether the factory would have been able to remain open to this day, I really seriously don't know. To be honest, looking at the way that a lot of companies are doing, I couldn't guarantee it, but I wouldn't kind of bet against it. Dundee women, female workers were really and continue to be really skilled, and you see in the documentary about the work and the intricate things they had to do when they were doing the watches and then making the circuit boards for the computers. They had to switch basically overnight to these circuit boards, and they were very quick and really skilled, which was one of the reasons why Timex was really attracted to opening up a factory in Dundee in the first place. So whether Timex would have survived is impossible to know really. Truthfully, no. There are many different variances and variables that would have come into play further on down the road till from 1993 to 2000. It was a good documentary. It's well worth watching, part of Dundee history. So there's not very many manufacturing places left at all in Dundee, unfortunately. Certainly no jobs for life or so. That there used to be. I know, again, people say it's modernising, think that the world does change, obviously it does. It's a really good documentary. I would suggest people to see it. Those who were around, were old enough to really know what was going on during those days, may appreciate it. Some people may not like it, some people may not like parts of it. But it's certainly, let's say, the last major strike in the UK, that's not really something that Dundee could be proud of. Really, in terms of where that last strike was. But again, it's a decent documentary. At least you get that kind of. If it's not a kind of documentary that people appreciate in terms of Dundee history, it's at least you get a good insight into the kind of the early 90s, I suppose you still call it early 90s life, and the way that in those days a factory operates, the kind of mentality of the workers, the atmosphere that's in there, and basically just what happens in a situation like that for humans. So it's about a good piece of human history as well. But it's a decent documentary. Obviously, I feel sorry for a lot of people losing their jobs like that. I mean, it's a slightly similar situation. Myself losing a job. It's very. Again, we don't really. I like maybe a document in the future. I guess another kind of bit that's glossed over how people moved on. Again, they only have an hour. Maybe they've been told they only have an hour, so they do. A few of them do talk about jobs they went on to. Obviously, a lot of the ladies are slightly older these days. As the gentlemen also, the employees are a bit older nowadays, so they have they can look a little bit back on it a little bit with a little bit of distance. They don't have some of them, at least some of the harder, the more intense feelings that they had in those days. But it's a good documentary, and I recommend people checking it out.